Hey Cake Chums, and welcome back to another video. Now this week in the Mr. Baker's Cakes kitchen, we're celebrating the first birthday of my niece, and obviously I have to mark the occasion with a very special cake. So in this week's video, I thought I would show you what I made and how I made it. Let's get to the video. Now I honestly can't believe it has been a whole year since my niece arrived, and obviously what a year it has been. Now luckily we are of course allowed to get together with friends and families outside in our gardens, and so we will be celebrating my niece's birthday with a family barbecue, and obviously, as I say, she needs a special cake to celebrate the day. Now my sister suggested that my niece might like a cake inspired by Mr. Onion from the BBC show Moon and Me. And having seen the character, I was immediately inspired, so I thought I'd invite you guys to come along with me as I show you how I made my Mr. Onion cake from Moon and Me for my niece's first birthday party. Let's get cracking. So let's get started. I baked 3 7-inch sponges for my Mr. Onion cake, and the first thing I'm going to do is level them with my Agbe cake leveler into 1-inch layers. Because I've got 3 cakes, that gives me 6 layers in total, and I decided to assemble this cake in 2 halves, so I'm going to use 3 1-inch layers for each half. Begin to carve your cake into a hemisphere shape, starting from the top and gradually turning the knife around to give you that curve. Take your time and only take off a little bit at a time, although I will say, all these people who tell you you can't attach cake if you take off too much, you can always stick it back on with some buttercream or ganache. Use some cocktail sticks to mark the correct place for the cake, and then separate the layers. Because we're going to be covering the cake with ganache, I start by piping a ring of ganache around the outside of the cake to act as a dam to contain my filling. Pipe your filling inside, and I'm just using buttercream today. I prefer not to use liquidy fillings like jam or curds in carved cakes, just because it makes them a little bit more sturdy. Once you've piped your filling in, put the next layer of cake on and repeat that until the entire cake has been filled. Do the same for the other cake so you have 2 hemispheres. Next we're going to give them a crumb coat of ganache. Spread a very thin layer of ganache over the entire cake. And then use a flexi smoother to take off any excess. It doesn't need to be perfectly smooth for the crumb coat, but it's a good habit to get into. Remember, any ganache that you take off the cake at this stage should be put into a separate bowl so that it doesn't contaminate your fresh ganache. Ideally, one of your hemispheres should have a flat top, so try not to make them both too curved. One of them needs to be the base. Pop those in the fridge to chill, and while they're doing that, we're going to make some cake pop mix. Take some of your cake cut-offs and add a generous amount of buttercream. Mix them together until smooth, and then take one of your hemispheres back out the fridge and pipe a little bit of ganache on top to act as a glue. Begin to add some cake pop mix to the top to give you the kind of stem part of Mr. Onion. Blend this down into the cake so it's nice and smooth, and shape it by hand using a reference photo to give you the right idea. When you're happy with the shape, trim it to the right height. Flatten the top. And finally add a small dome. Pop it back in the fridge to chill completely. When it's nice and solid, we're going to give it another coat of ganache. This time we want it to be nice and smooth, so really spend some time with your flexi smoothers, making sure everything is perfect. Once you've done that, you can pop both your cakes aside to set completely. Don't go to bed just yet though, because we've got one more job to do. We're going to colour our sugar paste, because that means it will have a chance to rest overnight and won't be too soft and hard to work with when we're ready to use it. To make the pale lilac colour for Mr. Onion skin, I used a small amount of Rainbow Dust Pro Gel in purple, and an even smaller amount of Rainbow Dust Pro Gel in pink, applied to some Renshaw Extra ready to roll icing. To make the slightly darker purple for his shoes, I used exactly the same colours, but just a little bit more of them. For his green trousers, I used rainbow dust leaf green, mint green and a little bit of navy blue because I felt that the green has a bit of a bluey undertone to it. For his lime green jacket, I used the Rainbow Dust Lime Green Pro Gel, which I absolutely love. And finally for his yellow sleeves, I obviously used Rainbow Dust Pro Gel in yellow. Once you finish colouring all your pastes, you can pop them in a sandwich bag and wrap them up tightly so they stay nice and soft, ready for the morning. To create the corduroy texture for Mr. Onion's skin, I armed and armed over lots of different techniques, including some of my modelling tools, or even trying to track down some sort of texture map. But then I stumbled across this pasta rolling pin on Amazon. It's actually designed for cutting out spaghetti or linguine, but I figured it would be fantastic for giving me that corduroy texture. If you'd like to get hold of one yourself, I'll pop a link to this one down in the video description. I started off by rolling out a small amount of my pale purple paste using a rolling pin, and you'll notice that I'm using corn flour to make sure that the paste doesn't stick to my stainless steel worktop. To make sure that the pasta pin doesn't cut all the way through the paste, I'm laying a little bit of cling film over the top and then rolling that pasta pin across the top to give me that texture. Cling film is a fantastic way to make sure cutters give you a really nice soft cut, and I'm using it again here to cut out a small circle of corduroy effect paste to put over the top of that dome. Brush it with a little bit of water, place it over the dome and gently smooth into place, trying hard not to ruin the texture. This is just to make sure that if anyone looks at your cake from above, we don't see any bare patches. Next we're going to cover the rest of the top of the cake. So roll out a good sized piece of the pale purple colour, lay a piece of cling film over the top and then use that pasta pin to apply a corduroy texture to all of the paste. You'll notice that I'm taking my time here to make sure that the pattern really lines up. Remove the cling film, make sure the paste isn't stuck to the worktop, and then use a sharp knife to cut a flat edge to one side of the paste. Brush the cake with a little bit of cooled boiled water using a large brush, and then roll your paste in from the two sides to give you a nice, easy to hold piece of paste. Starting at what will be the front of the cake, hold the paste up against it and then unroll it around the two sides to meet at the back. Because I'm using the Renshaw Extra, it's a lot easier to handle and less likely to break or tear, but you still want to work fairly quickly and confidently. Cut off any excess that's overhanging at the back to make it easier to work with, and then spend some time trying to smooth the paste up towards the top of the cake. Yes, it's completely alien compared to how we normally work, but I'm afraid it's the easiest way to do this design. Again, trim off any excess at the top, and then fold over the edges to give you that kind of cuddly toy effect that Mr. Onion has. I spent some time really trying to build in that fold at the front as well, because those are the sorts of features that will make your cake look really realistic. Once you're happy with how things are looking, return to the back and again trim off the excess so it's flush to the cake. Smooth down the join, and if you want to, you can really spend some time here making it look perfect, but I will confess I didn't. I actually ended up adding some stitch lines so it looked like, again, a bit of a cuddly toy effect. Go over any places that you've rubbed away the texture with your modelling tool. Next, I used a circle cutter to mark in where I wanted the smile to be, using a tape measure to check that it fits the dimensions that I had annotated on my design. Use a modelling tool to mark in the mouth shape before pushing in to create an alcove. Again, I spent some time here to really make things nice and neat. Silicone tip tools can be fantastic for smoothing sugar paste to get rid of any seams. Next, I use my thumbs to push in his recognisable dimples, and again use my modelling tool to make sure that that corduroy texture hadn't entirely disappeared. It was while I was doing this that I decided I wanted to go over the entire corduroy effect just to make it slightly more noticeable. Again, you don't have to do this, but you can if you'd like. I then took a small circle cutter that once again fit in with the dimensions on my design and used that to cut out the eye shapes. Use a modelling tool to remove the excess paste, being careful not to pull any of the ganache or buttercream off of your cake. Once you've done that, you can set that aside to start drying while we work on his jacket. Roll out your lime green sugar paste and then use a brand new clean scrubbing brush to impress loads of texture. This is a fab way to create a fabric effect. Use a ribbon cutter or a sharp knife to cut a long, thin strip and then cut one end at an angle to form his collar. Roll the paste up, once again so you can pick it up easily, and then bring the cake back. Brush around the bottom of the cake with cooled boiled water or edible glue if you'd prefer, and then unroll the lime green textured paste from the front, around the back to the front on the other side, using a knife to cut the paste so it matches on both sides. I actually cheated and used my scissors. Smooth it to the cake and check that you're happy with the symmetry. Once you are, give it a final smooth down just to make sure it's nice and firmly attached. This tool here is my secret weapon, and all it is one bunch of bristles cut off of my scrubbing brush and held together with a little bit of gaffer tape. This is a fantastic tool for adding texture to any small, hard to reach areas. You can create a similar effect by taping together some cocktail sticks. Next, grab your stitching tool and mark in the stitch outline around the outside and top edges of his jacket. You don't need to go all the way around the back, as most of this will be hidden by his collar. Speaking of his collar, cut another thin strip of the lime green modelling paste. Use a stitching tool to add stitch marks around the outside, and then brush the top edge of his jacket and his neck with some more water before pushing the collar into place. Spend some time trying to get this to sit as upright as you can, because it is quite scruffy, if I'm honest, in the show. My little wonder tool came in really handy again here, allowing me to apply that textured fabric effect to all of the cut edges of the paste, as well as helping me push his collar into place. When you've finished, it should look something like this. To do the board, I was inspired by this image that I found online. I started by rolling out some green sugar paste and applying loads of little dots or blobs of pink sugar paste. It took absolutely ages. I didn't bother sticking them in place or anything, I just placed them on, and then when I'd finished, I turned the paste upside down and rolled it out nice and thin. Brush your cake board with a little bit of water, and then use your rolling pin to lift up your paste and lay it across the board. How awesome does that look? Smooth it into place and then use a sharp knife to cut around the outside of the board, trimming off any excess. This can then be set aside to dry completely. Now we're going to work on the bottom half of the cake. So roll out the green paste that you made for his trousers, and once again use your scrubbing brush to apply loads of texture. Brush the cake with your cooled boiled water and drape the paste over the top. Make sure that that flat top is still there, because that's going to be our base, and then smooth the rest of the paste down the sides of the cake to the board. Try not to push too hard or you'll remove that texture that you've just spent ages adding. Pop a cake board or something similar on the top of the cake and use the spirit level to check that it is still level. Trim the excess paste around 1 inch to 1.5 inches around the side of the cake, and then we're going to do something that always scares people. We're going to flip it upside down. Don't panic that the paste starts to droop, because you can just gather it back up to the top again. Next, fold that excess paste over, because we want to create the effect that the top part of the cake is tucked into the bottom part later on. I ended up flipping mine over onto a 7-inch dummy and then using that to help me keep the paste where I wanted it to be. Measure marks around 1.5 inches apart using a tape measure or similar, and then use your modelling tool to draw lines from these marks all the way up to the top of the cake. You can then go over these with your stitching tool to make it look like sewing. When you're ready to begin building your cake, spread a little bit of royal icing onto the board where you want the base of the cake to sit. Remember to put it back slightly to allow room for his legs. Turn the board upside down and place it onto the base of the cake, making sure the royal icing is central to the bottom. This is another scary bit because we're going to turn the whole thing over. Once you've done that, you can lift off the dummy or whatever you're using to support your cake, and you should end up with something that looks like a green fluffy bowl on your board. Now you'll notice that we've exposed the bare edge of the cake, so next we're going to use some more of our buttercream filling just to make sure that all of the cake is sealed nice and safely inside. Next, insert some dowels cut to the right height. I ended up using 4. Remember to keep these quite close to the centre, otherwise they could poke out through the side of the cake. If you're interested in finding out where I got these dowels from, I'll leave a link down in the video description. Pipe a little bit more buttercream, ganache or even royal icing onto the tops of your dowels and place a cake board on top. This is what will support the top half of our cake. Ideally, you would have built the top part of the cake onto a board and won't need to lift it up in the scary way that I did. To make the eyes, roll out some white sugar paste, place some cling film on the top and then cut out 2 small circles, slightly smaller than the holes we made for the eyes. Annoyingly, I left the cake out of shot while I put them on, so I do apologise about that. Stick them into the centre of the spaces and then gently ease the paste out towards the edges using your fingers so it looks something like this. You'll also notice that I've wrapped the base of the cake in some cling film just to make sure that that paste doesn't sag too much. Very gently smooth the edges of the eyes so that they meet the purple paste, leaving no gap. Next, cut out 2 slightly smaller circles of black sugar paste to form the pupils. These can also be glued into place with water. To make his eyelids, I cut out 1 circle of the pale purple sugar paste and then cut off 2 of the edges. I placed these onto the eye, sticking them with water, and then spent some time shaping them until I was really happy. Make sure you keep referring to your reference images to make sure that you are creating a realistic likeness. Finally, I cut out 4 small circles to add catch lights to his eyes, again attaching them with a little bit of water. While I had the white paste out, I also made his handkerchief just by cutting 4 triangles and laying them on top of each other before gluing them to his side. To make his pocket, roll out some more of the green sugar paste that we use for his trousers and impress texture in with your scrubbing brush. Use a large circle cutter to cut out a circle. And then cut a flat edge on one side. This will be the top of his pocket. Use your stitching tool to add stitch lines across that flat edge. And I actually spent a little time shaping it by hand before using some water to glue it into place over the top of the bottom of his handkerchief. To make his legs, I rolled a thick sausage of green paste, impressing loads of texture into it with my scrubbing brush. Cut it in half and then trim off the rounded edges so you end up with 2 sausages with flat ends. Squeeze down one end on each one, impressing even more texture in, and push them into the bottom of the cake to check you're happy with the size. Once you are, you can put some water onto the cake board and glue them into place. Once again, there's my homemade tool being used to add loads of extra texture to all of those hard to reach places. I'm so sorry, but I completely forgot to record the process of making his hands, so I do apologise. I simply made 2 oval shapes and then cut out the thumb and 3 fingers. If you would like to see me make them again in a separate video, let me know down in the comments and I'll see what I can do. These were just glued into place by adding a little bit of water to the cake board. I made his arms in exactly the same way that I made the legs, by rolling a large sausage of the yellow sugar paste and impressing loads of texture in again. Cut it into 2 equal sausages and check them against the cake to make sure you're happy with the length. You'll notice that I constantly refer back to the cake all the time just to make sure that I am happy. Once I am, I cut the tops of the arms at a diagonal, making sure that they matched. And then check them against the cake once again. They were slightly too long, so I trimmed off a bit more. I added in some elbow marks using my modelling tool, and also a few crease marks here and there as well. Brush any cut edges with some water, and then stick them into place at the shoulder and on the hand. There's my homemade tool once again. Seriously, I should actually patent it. Go over any marks that you may have distorted while you were gluing them on, and then finally add some stitch marks around the wrist to form a cuff and at the shoulder where the arms would be sewn onto the jacket. Now it's time for the shoes. To make the soles of the shoes, I decided to use some flower paste. I coloured this purple and then rolled it out to a thickness of about 1 centimetre before cutting out 2 oval shapes. The reason I'm using flower paste is it would dry nice and solid and hopefully support itself. To make the decorations on his sole, I'm using some red sugar paste, cutting out circles in 2 different sizes before hand cutting the little cupcake shapes. I'm sorry if you can't see this very well, but hopefully you all know what a cupcake looks like. To add the smiley faces to the cupcakes, I just used one of my Rainbow Dust Cake Craft pens in purple. I glued everything into place using a little bit of water, once again referring to some of my inspiration images to make sure they're in the right places. Once I've done that, I set these aside to dry completely. While they were starting to dry, I used another one of my Cake Craft pens in red to add the stitching around the end of his handkerchief, and also just by doing some little shading marks in yellow and blue. To make the rest of the shoes, I used 2 Rice Krispie squares as I didn't need enough rice cereal mixture to warrant making a whole batch of it myself. I used the same cutter that I used to cut out the soles to cut out 2 pieces of rice cereal mixture before rolling out some of the darker purple sugar paste that we prepared yesterday. I cut that piece in half, and using one of them, I brushed it with a little bit of water before using it to cover the rice cereal shape that we've made. Smooth it down just like you would a cake before trimming off any excess around the edges. You'll notice we haven't covered the rice cereal mixture with ganache or buttercream, so don't roll your sugar paste too thin as any texture will show through. Fold the rest of the excess paste over onto the bottom of the shoe, smoothing it as neatly as you can. I spent quite a lot of time here making them look really neat and smooth, as these are right at the front of the cake, so they don't want to be messy. Once I finished doing that, I did the second one before adding them to the cake. To do that, I used a large scribing tool to poke a hole into the cake board before threading in a cocktail stick. Slide the rice cereal mixed shoe down onto the cocktail stick before brushing the bottom with a little bit of water and sticking the soles into place. It's really important that you make sure the shoe is the same size and shape as the sole, otherwise they'll look quite odd together. Confession, I actually remade my shoes because I wasn't happy with how they looked the first time. To make the shoelaces, I just rolled some purple sugar paste into really thin sausages. If you find it tricky to do that by hand, you can use an icing smoother to help you instead. I also impressed a little bit of texture into the tops of his shoes, but it was impossible to capture it on film because of the awkward angle. Again, use your reference images if you're not sure what they should look like. Place 2 strips of the purple sausage across the shoes as normal laces before making 2 bows as his knotted laces. glue these into place with a little bit of water. Again, I apologise for the awkward angle, you can't really see what I'm doing here at all. Next, we're going to paint on his eyebrows, and to do this I use some Rainbow Dust edible powder colour mixed with a little bit of dipping solution. I prefer this to vodka because it dries so incredibly quickly. The last job is to use some more edible powder colours to add some texture and shading to our cake. To do this, you want to choose colours that are just very slightly darker than the colour that you are shading onto. And you want to apply this to anywhere that there would be a natural shadow, such as a seam, underarms, around the eyes, and anywhere that the clothes are lying over the skin. I'm sure you'll agree that it really brings our Mr. Onion character to life. Once you've done that, your cake is ready. Finish it off by applying a ribbon around the edge of the board. So there you go guys, that was how I created a Mr. Onion cake inspired by the BBC show Moon and Me for my niece's first birthday. I do hope you enjoyed that video, and if you are inspired to create your own Mr. Onion cake, then do be sure to get in touch and let me know. I'd love to see it. If you did enjoy this video, please do give it a thumbs up down below. That will let YouTube know to show it to more people. And if it's your first visit here to Mr. Baker's Cakes on YouTube, then do be sure to hit that big red subscribe button before you go. If you are already subscribed and would like to receive a notification every time I upload a new video, which incidentally I do every Sunday at 10 AM, then make sure you also hit that bell icon too. Other than that guys, all that remains is for me to wish you a very happy bank holiday weekend, whatever you are doing to celebrate, and I will see you at the same time next week for another video. Until then, stay safe, take care, and of course, happy caking. Bye guys.